Want a quick 10-minute wrap-up of the week's compliance news? Well, this is the podcast for you, 10 for 10, where Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, wraps up 10 top compliance stories which occurred over the past week. If you don't know, Tom has a daily news podcast, appropriately called the Daily Compliance News, and 10 for 10 wraps up the week. So get up on a Saturday morning, have a great cup of coffee, and check out 10 for 10, the podcast which gives you the week's top compliance news. Are you interested in upping your game in compliance through the use of AI and machine learning technology? Well, check out my latest book, Upping Your Game, How Compliance and Risk Management Move to 2030 and Beyond. You can check it out in the show notes. I've got a link to the purchase at Amazon.com. Upping Your Game. 10 for 10 for the week ending May 31, 2025, the end of May edition. We have multiple stories this week on corruption and multiple stories from Bloomberg. We begin with a story about Indonesian investigators have invited Singapore-based oil traders to meet to discuss the $12 billion corruption probe into the Indonesian state-owned oil firm Petromania. The request came through the Indonesian Attorney General, and the Singapore-based traders have been asked to attend meetings, although there is no confirmation they'll attend. This, of course, is an outgrowth of the massive series of corruption enforcement actions involving oil trading companies, BP, PLC, Glencore, Vitol, among others, that had sustained huge FCPA violations over the past several years. Our next story, once again from Bloomberg, is even more troubling, that the European Central Bank Governing Council member Peter Casimir has been convicted of bribery and fined 200,000 euros, which is about $225,000, in a ruling that will certainly cause embarrassment to the Frankfurt institution. A court near Bratislava said that if he fails to pay the fine, he'll need to serve 1 year in prison. Casimir has indicated he will appeal and, more significantly, does not intend to resign from his post. That means a very awkward meeting with his colleagues coming up in Frankfurt on June 4th for the next policy meeting. An ECB spokesman declined to comment, but Slovakia's central bank said it had taken note of the ruling, and the bank continues to operate without restrictions and fulfills its functions to the fullest extent possible. Oops. In a huge story that's been ongoing for a long, long time, Tim Leisner, the Goldman Sachs former partner at the center of the 1MDB scandal, was sentenced to 2 years in prison. What was interesting about the sentencing was that Leisner had asked for no time in prison, and the prosecution had agreed with that. But Goldman Sachs wrote a letter to the court saying that it was him, Leisner. If it hadn't been for him, this scandal may not have happened. And more importantly, he's never acknowledged or repaid any of the monies he got out of the scandal. So it's very odd that both the prosecution and defense would ask for no jail time, but the court felt it was appropriate based upon Leisner's conduct. Our next story is there were a series of pardons that were bought basically from the Trump administration, and one of those was a sheriff from Virginia who was facing a 10-year prison sentence for being convicted of bribery and corruption. So he had been paid more than $75,000 in bribes for appointing wealthy businessmen from the area of Culpeper County, Virginia, as law enforcement personnel, and the feds called it cash for badges. And President Trump pardoned him. So yet another pardon from President Trump. And finally, a story from the New York Times, which reports that the Chinese are moving Uyghurs out of the Xinjiang region of China, but are still basically enslaving them in forced labor camps. And it's increasingly more difficult for companies to be able to track this human trafficking and modern slavery issue in the workplace. So it's something that U.S. companies are going to have to be cognizant of, and the federal governments have to figure out how to enforce the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act going forward. Next up, in a pretty troubling article from Business Insider, it indicates that you better fill out your employee satisfaction survey to the satisfaction of your company. Otherwise, you may be leaving the company. It reports a manager employee who filled out a survey and received an email from the CEO saying, basically, don't let the door hit you on the way out if you don't like working here. So nothing like trust to engender culture in the workplace. Next up from Africa News, reports that Ghana has temporarily shut down its embassy in the United States after a major corruption scandal involving visa fraud and unauthorized payments was uncovered by a special audit. The foreign minister announced the decision, describing it as a necessary step to restore integrity and accountability in Ghana's diplomatic missions abroad. The audit revealed that a locally hired IT officer had created an unauthorized link where he was paid for visas and others receipts or information from the Ghana embassy. Next up from Reuters, more bad news for EY continues as it was accused of failing to spot a major fraud by main shareholders of the UAE hospital operator NMC in what lawyers for the firm's administrators called disgraceful auditing, the start of a $3 billion trial in London. The administrators of the company, an FTSE 100 when it collapsed in 2020, after disclosing more than $4 billion in hidden debt, are suing over audits from 2012 to 2018, where EY gave an unqualified opinion that the books and records were accurate. EY's response, they lied to us and they defrauded us. Isn't that the purpose of an audit, to uncover that? Apparently not from EY's position, as it's denied the negligence allegation and literally said that it was the company's personnel who perpetrated the fraud and manipulated the accounts. Yeah, no kidding. But isn't that the way fraud always works? NMC's administrators are seeking up to £2.7 billion in damages from EY, largely relating to undisclosed guarantees, but court filings put the figure closer to $2 billion plus interest. Next up, there were a series of articles about Boeing this week. And first of all, the Department of Justice has completely waved the white flag, says we won't prosecute Boeing. In fact, we're going to give them a non-prosecution agreement, which of course means no court oversight and no monitor. So for those who thought that there might be some rigorous government involvement in Boeing's compliance, ethics, and anti-fraud program going forward, well, that's gone to the wind. And it shows, I think, that any company can get out of any bad actions simply by paying a bunch of money. You won't have to really be held accountable or report to anyone on your compliance activities going forward. Additionally, Boeing reported in a report that it has a hotline. So yes, Boeing is moving forward. And finally, the UK crime agency, National Crime Agency, has obtained 2 freezing orders on London properties owned by people connected to the former Bangladeshi Prime Minister. And hopefully they will move to be able to collect on these freezing orders. So kudos to at least someone fighting anti-corruption, even if it's the United Kingdom. This is Tom Fox again. 10 for 10 is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I'd also urge you to check out the Daily Compliance News, which posts every week from Monday to Friday, where I give 4 curated stories of bribery, corruption, and compliance events that will allow you to help you start your day as well. So check out the Daily Compliance News and subscribe or rate and review to both 10 for 10 and the Daily Compliance News. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency. Finally, if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, I am preparing a new season of Adventures in Compliance where I go through the 4 novels of Sherlock Holmes. Hear it on the Compliance Podcast Network.